There has been a resurgence of a retro aesthetic, a push from hyperrealism to decrease quality within horror games, where remakes of 20-year-old games like Resident Evil 2 and Silent Hill 2 are looking to replicate detail down to the pixel. Indie developers are going back in time, mimicking the low-quality texture and limited polygons you would see on a PlayStation 1 or Nintendo 64. This quote-unquote PlayStation horror has been around for a few years, gaining more and more steam, with creators like Puppet Combo, Chilla's Art, and Kitty Horror Show. One game that I would like to focus on that uses this aesthetic is Mouthwashing. The game's low quality and short runtime doesn't hold it back, as it is a dense 2 hours of storytelling deploying psychological horror masterfully. I quite enjoy psychological horror. It doesn't scare me in the same way other horror mediums do, but instead it makes me feel unsettled or uncomfortable thinking about it well after watching it. And Mouthwashing is no exception to that. You find the characters on a freighter ship, the Tolpar, working for a company named Pony Express. The crew consists of the Captain Curly, the timid nurse Anya, the mean old man mechanic Swansea, the last-minute intern Daisuke, and Jimmy the co-pilot. Played in a first-person point of view, you follow a non-linear telling of the story, with events prior to the crash from Curly's perspective and after from Jimmy's. Most of the ship's resources are blocked off by this airbag-like foam, where any damage could potentially breach the ship's hull and kill the entire crew in an instant. When food and medical supplies begin to run low after 2 months, the crew decides to open up their shipment in hopes of finding something for their survival. However, it is just thousands of bottles of mouthwash. The one overarching theme that I feel hasn't been discussed as much is capitalism. On a surface level, it is apparent that the crew is in a capitalist society, with the propaganda of the company's mascot, Holly the pony, plastered on the walls of the ship, having positive affirmations in massive text, but in small text, threatening to dock pay for sleeping more than 5 hours. But it goes deeper, as within each of the characters, they themselves represent a negative created from a system. Majority of Mouthwashing is through the perspective of Jimmy in the aftermath of the crash. Despite being the main character, he is overall a shitty person, as he lies and manipulates everyone around him, and has a complete lack of care for anyone but himself. So what does Jimmy represent for the overall message of the game? Well, it is the warped idea of the quote-unquote new man created from capitalism. For one, individualism and capitalism go hand in hand, as the duality of individualism is driven by consumption and the success bound within a person believing they owe nothing to their community or society. All that matters is that they are pushing and striving and getting the most success and having the most. This possessive individualism perfectly encaptures Jimmy's motives and actions throughout the entire game. One moment of note is towards the climax of the game. Anya locks herself into the medical room with Curly. Afraid she's going to kill Curly, Jimmy and Daisuke hatch a plan to use the broken vents to get into the medical room. Problem is, the only way to get to the medical room through the broken vents is to get through Swansea, who is blocking off the utility room. He's overall stubborn and refuses to give up the key no matter what they say. Jimmy decides to make a cocktail and spike it with isopropyl alcohol to knock out Swansea. Yep, this is our captain, guys. He then proceeds to manipulate a very nervous Daisuke to climb into the vents into the medical room. Daisuke repeatedly tells Jimmy that he is nervous and doesn't know if it is a good idea to follow through with their plan, but Jimmy even doubles down, using his self-given title as captain as power over Daisuke. It does work. They get into the medical room, but at the expense of Daisuke getting badly injured and the discovery that their only medic on board has committed suicide. It derails even further when Jimmy is trying to quote-unquote fix the situation. He tries to clean Daisuke's wounds, but of course there's no isopropyl to properly clean them since he used it to spike the drink. He proceeds to use mouthwash instead, causing not only more pain for Daisuke, but it does nothing as he slowly dies out on the floor. A fantastic instance of foreshadowing, tying back to when Anya mentions and highlighting Jimmy's lack of respect and regard for anyone as he ignores the warning from Anya and proceeds to still use it on Daisuke. He has never had any regard for the safety of the crew, only if it benefits himself. He only does it because he thinks that will make him a good leader. He needs to fix the situation, not save Daisuke. This also ties back into how he views Curly the captain, this idolization of him that turns into jealousy over his power and his position that he withholds over Jimmy. As Curly confides with Jimmy about his true feelings of being a leader, whether he is unsure if this is where he wants to be or if he should try something new, all Jimmy can ever think about is his self in the situation. I guess I get it. You reached the highest rung on this ladder. So now you're thinking, might be on the wrong ladder altogether. Still a long way down from the top no matter how you think about it. Well, I'm still climbing and climbing. This idea of Jimmy climbing the ladder is recalled once again while at a celebration of Curly's birthday as he breaks the news to the ship that Pony Express is going under, and once they finish the job, they will no longer have a job. Jimmy, the most enraged out of the group, directs it towards Curly. As the crash leaves Curly unfit to lead, Jimmy gladly scoops up the opportunity to move from co-pilot to captain of the toll bar. 2 months after the crash, as the rest of the crew is at the table discussing what to do next, Jimmy mentions that, which is a line that stuck with me throughout the game because it definitely was for worse, but Jimmy also isn't a good leader. In fact, it doesn't even seem like he deserves the position of leader anyways. And even after jumping up to take the position as fast as possible, Jimmy even goes as far as to make it seem like the rest of the crew pinned this responsibility onto him, which is wild because he was chomping at the bit to have just an ounce of power that Curly had. Anya is an interesting character. She is purposely given so little. We don't even know what her dreams, motives, or life was like back on Earth, like we do with the rest of the crew. Yet she is such an important role in the game overall and a character that stuck with me the most. Anya is first seen as this timid nurse. She acts anxious when interacting at all. But when we cut to scenes through the eyes of Jimmy, she is the opposite, relaxed and even joking with him. She also doesn't seem to act this way when talking to Swansea or Daisuke, but only with Jimmy. Which does make sense, since he isn't ever kind to Anya. He constantly pushes her down, never taking her seriously when she is just trying to do her job, ignoring her statements about the mouthwash sugar contents, and belittles her when she asks for help with Curly's medication. Following this interaction between them, you get to see why Anya is disturbed by the noise of Curly having to forcibly take the medication. And there's multiple instances as well that disproves Anya being incompetent or not good at her job. The fact alone that she's even able to keep Curly alive in their situation 4 months prior to the crash proves that. It's interesting that Jimmy never acts this way towards anyone. With Curly, he never acts that way until he is injured and immobile in the medical room, then he forcibly shoves medication down his throat. He doesn't do it to Daisuke since he knows how naive and positive he can be, and he can use it to his advantage, and he knows that he certainly can't get away with mistreatment towards Swansea. He knows that he's not going to take it. But Anya, he can dominate and oppress Anya easily. The game cuts back and forth between the scenes in which we find out Anya is dead, but there's two notable ones. The first one is from Curly's perspective 2 days prior to the crash, as he finds Anya awake at night watching the night screen, and they end up talking together. Anya doesn't say it explicitly here, but a mention of 8 months and lock on the sleeping quarters, it's heavily implied that something happened to her. You have another scene as well where you play as Curly, who happens to look for the gun as it is missing, and as you go into the cockpit, you find Anya laying on the floor. It becomes clear the depravity of Jimmy and the lengths that he will go to instill power, especially over Anya. It is no wonder why Anya is nervous around him, or that she can't go forth and give Curly the medication, as it reminds her of being forced into something she never wanted to do. Anya's story reflects on two major things: toxic masculinity and the oppression of women's voices in capitalism. It's no doubt that if Jimmy aspires to have this power and takes on the aspects of individualism and capitalism, that he would also take on male supremacy as well. As the patriarchy has existed long before capitalism, it still remains, as both share the same attributes of female oppression and exploitation. He even does this well before finding out what the company's going over, and seems to have no worries or fears of what he even did to Anya, since he knows that if you have the power, it can't touch you, which is quite a reality we see constantly, with famous people or people in power paying off or oppressing voices of women who are victims of SA. The oppression of women in a capitalist society is even more apparent when, in the aftermath of Anya confiding in Curly, he doesn't take action. He tells her, "We can fix it," which is, again, crazy, because you can't fix that situation. And he doesn't even say anything about reprimanding Jimmy. He doesn't even reprimand Jimmy at all. Since he's the leader of the ship, there is nothing that Anya could do. She's stuck on the ship. Daisuke I found to be the most relatable character, as he reflects the struggles of finding your place within society. He is seen as a cheery optimist, not the smartest engineer, but he tries his damn best. However, as we go further into the game, we see this mask disappear. In one scene where you are tasked with checking on the crew, you find Daisuke lying on the floor of the ship. He's drunk off mouthwash. It is quite relatable to not know what you are doing with your life. As for myself, I can heavily relate to that sentiment. And the fact that not knowing what you want to do with your life, not being perfect in the eyes of society, fitting the role you're expected to be, makes you a total screw up, even though he's not. It's not fair for anyone to really know what they're doing or what anybody does, but yet we still have these expectations forced onto ourselves because that's what is expected of us. That's what they want from us. I find it tragic, too, that Daisuke has so much optimism and potential, but it's completely wasted. Swansea is the red herring of the story. He's the cranky, old, mean alcoholic engineer on the ship who is rude to everybody. The game even sets us up from the beginning, as after the crash he guards the utility room, letting nobody in, saying it's dangerous from all of the foam inside. However, after he gets knocked out by Jimmy and Daisuke and they go inside, they see that the room is barely foamed up at all, and one of the cryopods on the ship is untouched and working order. By the way, there is cryopods on the ship that can keep people alive up to 20 years, but it was assumed throughout the entirety of the game that they were all broken. Jimmy assumes that Swansea hid it from the group to save himself in the end, but of course this isn't the case. In fact, everything we know about Swansea isn't fully true. Sure, he's a dick to Daisuke, but he is actually quite merciful and caring of him. Towards the end, when Daisuke is on his last legs and dying slowly on the floor, Swansea realizes that he's just not going to make it no matter what and decides to put him out of his misery. Before he does, though, he talks about how he feels remorse for Daisuke being put on the ship with the rest of the quote-unquote sad crew and that he never deserved any of this. Before he takes an axe to his head. The sentiment of Daisuke ties back to his character of just trying his best despite not knowing what he is doing with his life, but shows Swansea's caring nature over Daisuke, decided to take action and save him from any more suffering. Jimmy calls Swansea a monster for not letting him fix the situation. When Jimmy goes on to accuse him of hiding the pod from everyone, Swansea then turns it back on him, saying it wasn't even meant for himself, and that he's the real monster since Anya told him what he did to her. In multiple broken up scenes, Jimmy is running from Swansea trying to kill him. And first, he's locked in the cockpit looking for the gun. However, we already know at this point Anya hid it from him. Right after Daisuke dies, we find the gun in the medical room. This is also where we find out Anya has killed herself, and see the gun right below Curly's bed. There's another scene as well in this strange dreamscape where you have to run around a cemetery and shoot Swansea dead in the face. And once you do so, you're transported to another scene. Swansea is tied to a chair, and Jimmy stands in front of him. Only their silhouettes are seen as Swansea gives his final words to him. Swansea, after climbing this quote unquote ladder, reaching and achieving all of the things he's supposed to want, because society tells him that, decides he regrets it all and that it's unfulfilling to him and that he would rather end up being drunk for the rest of his life. This scene stuck with me the most because it just feels so strange to hear. I mean, we're told that you gotta work hard and do all the right things and stay out of trouble, or mainly being don't turn into an alcoholic or don't do drugs in order to live a good life. And it's pushed so heavily onto us that when people quote unquote clean up their lives, it's all sunshines and rainbows for the best, but it's not always for the best. It's not that simple. Not everyone fits into normalcy. Of course, not saying alcoholism is an answer, but it's just so telling that the unfulfillment of society and being a good, honest person was pushed onto him that he decided he'd rather be going from bottle to bottle instead of just living that way. At last, we have the captain, Curly, who is stereotyped as the perfect leader. However, we know that not to be true, as his lack of responsibility over Jimmy leads to the downfall of the ship to begin with. His ailments leave him unable to move, speak, or do anything but breathe and cry out in pain as he's stuck to witness the horrors that take hold on the ship. This is further emphasized with the cruel treatment of Jimmy towards him, as he's powerless now, unable to stop Jimmy from forcing the pills down his throat or do anything but scream as Jimmy cuts his leg off his piece of paper and forces him to eat it. What the fuck? Besides that, we aren't given that much about Curly, especially after that accident. We know prior to the crash that he was questioning his role as leader and whether he was meant to stay in this job or to move on to something new. And it's safe to assume that he probably regrets his decision to even have Jimmy there in the first place after knowing all of this was going to happen. But that's it. Or is it? Yeah, that's right. I got you. This actually isn't one game review, this is 2 game reviews. In 2022, the team at Wrong Oregon released a game called How Fish is Made, which is also another game that I could probably sit down and talk about for 30 minutes because I absolutely love this game as well. The concept is pretty simple. You play as a fish moving through a decrepit machine where you must choose up or down. No further context is even given at all. Throughout your journey, you talk to other fish, some dead set on their choice, trying to convince you that they are right. Some unsure and paralyzed with the idea of even making a choice at all, and even a singing parasite inside of a fish's mouth with disturbing images in the background. Lovely. But besides that, in the end, you must choose, up or down. Choosing down, you are shown an amalgamation of meat stacked into a can neatly, displaying text that you'd see on the back of a brand of canned fish. However, when you choose up, you're shown a pile of discarded, pulsating meat. Your growing mass is a grand, leaking open wound. All thoughts wail simultaneously at the merged knowing of insignificant brains. Complete worldly knowledge curls in on itself into a snarled amalgamation. The weight of information collapses in on itself, vast but useless. This putrid mass rots from within, mauls, dies, impregnates itself to birth more fat, more muscle, more tissue. Nothing can be accomplished, for a consensus cannot be reached. As one, you are a swelling god of no purpose, no direction, no self. The game's main theme is the illusion of choice. Up or down doesn't matter for the fish, as they are still dead meat at the end of the day. But how does this tie back into mouthwashing? Well, when you play the expansion pack, you're once again a fish, but this time in a similar foam seen throughout the Tulpar. You roll around in this foam collecting pieces of dead fish to join your amalgamation. There are even more references to mouthwashing, with fishes representing characters in the game, and a sea of mouthwash battles you need to travel through. But nothing is as prevalent as seeing the overlooking head of Curly after the crash talking to the fish. His first piece of dialogue talks about how he ends up with the job to begin with. Although it's vague, it ties back to how he feels in his position as captain. He's unsure whether he should move on to bigger things or remain complacent in his job. Sure, he's in a good position, but he's isolated and the world moves on without him. The second one is a really cruel joke about not being able to work anymore, a reminder of his injuries that he endured on the ship. This also referencing your usefulness within capitalism, as instead of focusing on the pain that he endured or how he will move on, he makes fun of the fact that he will probably never be able to work again, not even considering the fact that he literally had his leg cut off. What do you mean? The last piece of dialogue I found to be the most interesting. Next comes Spite. First it stares back at you in the mirror. Then it's all those around you. They're wearing your face, and you're wearing theirs. You know, he joined because of me. What were the words I used? Ah, right. It's a great opportunity, easy money, just a trip or two. Someone else's words in my mouth. Hey, worked on me as well, right? Change hurts, but worse things fester for a long time. I told him as much. I tried. I really did. We're defined by our past, but we're not slaves to it. We said tomorrow would be different. Today will be the last day, the last one. The last one. And then another. And then another. His mouthwashing is mainly about Jimmy and his journey of taking responsibility with his very surreal, dreamlike visions. How Fish is made is the same thing but through Curly's mind, trapped in an endless cycle of regret, rethinking his decisions as he realizes nothing could be fixed. Jimmy couldn't be fixed. It was just an illusion power to help him, the illusion that he had a choice to begin with to stop all of this. It's so interesting to me, his character, because it feels like a lot of people boil him down as just either being a bad guy or he's completely innocent, but it's neither of the two. I think that's why I find his character the most interesting to me, this fact of bringing up the fact of the illusion of choice, this existential dread. A dread that I have felt myself looking at the pain and the chaos and the suffering that has come from capitalism itself. This illusion of choice is all present within it, with your individual choice being exploited to give you a sense of power, to give you a sense of purpose, but in the end, it doesn't matter as the cycle continues on without you.
At the end of the game, everything you are told or you're thought to believe is not true. You find out that Jimmy, even though he's incompetent, isn't the victim in this. In fact, he's the instigator, the villain of the story. After doing what he did to Anya, and Anya telling Curly, and the fact that they're losing their jobs at the end of this, Jimmy decides there's no purpose in anything that he's doing anymore, that he would just rather go down with the ship completely, risk killing everybody in the process instead of just taking any responsibility or reprimands for what he did. In the end, he realizes what he did is wrong, but not to anybody else, just to Curly. He feels bad only to Curly, and he decides the only way to fix the situation is by putting Curly into the cryopod and killing himself, which is just absolutely insane. He has no remorse at all for what he did to Swansea, what he did to Daisuke, or especially to Anya.
Mouthwashing does a fantastic job at its psychological horror and captivation of an audience. I heard about this game about a month after it released, and I stayed up till 3 a.m. watching a playthrough because I am silly and I don't have a laptop that's compatible for this game, and Apple sucks, but unfortunately I'm a sucker for getting a MacBook, but that's besides the fact. I'm still just really enamored by the game and how they do this, because there's so much more detail that I even left out as well. I tried to keep it as brief as possible because and I didn't want this to be 2 hours. But like even now, like as I watched the game again to discuss it, there were still more things that I hadn't noticed. And it's just like, it's crazy how it's able to like captivate like the entirety of like the dread that comes within capitalism, the toxic masculinity, the oppression of women, how you're struggling to find your place in this world, and then even just like the existential dread within living in the system of this endless cycle is captured in this game. It's wild. I really like this game a lot. I think the game does a fantastic job of the story building alone and just completely blows it out of the water. All I have to say is thank you for listening to my rambling. And I've also really enjoyed this class a lot as well, and I'm glad that I get to do a project like this where I get to sit here for 25 minutes and talk about a game that I really like for fun. So thank you a lot. And that's it. Yay!